Bonjour mes amis, welcome to the Armchair Linguist YouTube channel. I'm Tyler, the Armchair Linguist. I'm not actually a linguist, just a language enthusiast. But I'm so glad that you're here today. Today I'd like to talk to you about what languages I'm learning and why. Right now I'm learning two languages actively. I'm learning Norwegian and French. So I'll take those one at a time and talk to you about each one and why I'm learning them. I've been studying Norwegian since the end of 2019, and I initially decided to study it because I would also like to study the language of the Vikings, Old Norse, and I figured that having a modern spoken language under my belt would help me to study that more effectively. Now, Norwegian is not the closest language to Old Norse that's spoken today. That's Icelandic, and I have dabbled in Icelandic, but Norwegian has so many more resources than Icelandic does that I thought it would be a better choice for me personally to learn Norwegian instead of Icelandic, and I do plan on going back to Icelandic again because it's a really cool language. After I started learning Norwegian, I was reminded that my father's family comes primarily from Norway, and my dad sent me some information about my family that is really cool, I think. My great-great-grandfather, Magnus Ben Jameson, was born in Norway and moved to the United States in 1888. They originated from Velfjord, Norway. And so although that information didn't affect my decision to learn Norwegian, it is a cool thing that will keep me going in the language because I think it would be really cool to go to the Ben Jameson homestead in Velfjord one day. Another reason that I wanted to learn Norwegian was that I had always been told that it was a really difficult language to learn. Looking back, now that I've studied some of it, I think that those people who told me that really didn't know what they were talking about. But I remember one person told me that there are only two kinds of people that are learning Norwegian: Norwegian babies and Mormon missionaries. Now me, so that's a third person. But now that I've been studying Norwegian, I've found it to be really fun and intuitive, and in a lot of ways it's like what English should be without all of the weird rules and different things that make English probably truly the hardest language in the world to learn. But one of the parts about Norwegian that I am a little bit intimidated by that seems really difficult is that there is no standard spoken Norwegian, and there are several different forms of standard written Norwegian. So Norwegian exists in kind of a rough geographic spectrum where the closer you get to Sweden, the more Norwegian resembles Swedish, and the farther away you get from Sweden, the less it resembles Swedish. And to me that is kind of scary and intimidating because some of the dialects, like the Bergen dialect and some of the others, are quite different from the bokmål that you learn in Duolingo and from other learning sources. Dialects aside, Norwegian is a beautiful language from a country that has a rich history and ancient culture, and it's not a language that I had planned on learning when I started learning languages, but I'm so glad that I started. Now with French, I've been studying that language for almost 7 years now. It's not a new language for me, but it is a language that I still actively study because I don't want it to decay. I'll do a video later on about how I juggle those two things, but my fascination with French started pretty early. I remember when I was 10 or 13 years old just reading nothing but Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Journey to the Center of the Earth, The Time Machine, those kind of golden age of adventure, late Victorian novels. I also read The Phantom of the Opera, which was one that I really loved. A couple years later, I began to be really obsessed with the Broadway musicals Les Miserables and Phantom of the Opera, and those musicals affected me a lot more than I knew. Even when I was 16 and I was in high school, French class, we had to use the French versions of our names, so Chris became Christophe, Henry became Henri, and Jimmy became Jacques. Tyler did not have a French equivalent, and so I got to pick a French name, and I chose Raoul, like Raoul de Chagny, the hero of Phantom of the Opera. That's the extent to which those musicals and those books affected me in my early teenage years. But my experience in French class was a complete disaster. Not due to the teacher or due to the class, it was due to my own immaturity and my frustration with peers. I felt like my peers weren't trying hard enough because while I was saying toucher les fenêtres, they were saying touchez la fenêtre, and it just was really frustrating to me. And due to my immaturity, I dropped out. But despite French class being a complete disaster, it still affected me. Even 20 years later, I can still remember a sentence that I made up in that junior year French class, jette les poissons bleus, which is throw the blue fish. And I think if Miss Parsons were still alive, she would be proud of the fact that even I retained something from her class. My adult journey into French started when I was engaged to be married, and we decided to move our wedding from the backyard to Ireland. And while we were in Europe, we were going to visit Paris, and I didn't want to be that American guy who doesn't speak any French. And so I started learning French as an adult, really learn it, and I stuck with it. When I got to Paris, I could be polite, I could ask for the toilet, I could ask for food, and I could read enough to navigate the city without any real problem. Now that I've studied French for 7 years, the things that keep me attracted to it as a language are a lot different than when I started. French was the most important language in the world really up until World War II. It was the language of the monarchies in almost every country in Europe for hundreds of years, even in England. It was also the language, along with German, of the intellectual. I think, therefore I am. It's hard to free people from the chains they revere. All for one, one for all. Reason is the madness of the strongest. The reason of those less strong is madness. Many of the great philosophical works of the Victorian and modern age were originally in French. During the French Revolution, the French state violently transitioned from a monarchy based on the divine to a republic based on reason. So if you want to experience Voltaire, Descartes, and other great philosophers, or if you want to experience Dumas, Hugo, and Verne, and other great authors in the language they were writing in, consider learning French. On the practical side, French has had a huge impact on English since the Norman invasion of 1066. A lot of the fancy words that we have in English are derived from French. For instance, we don't eat pig, we eat pork. Pig is the Scandinavian-derived word, pork is the French-derived word. We don't eat cow, we eat beef. Cow is the English word, beef is the French-derived word. Having learned French first has made other languages easier for me to learn. For instance, Icelandic has notoriously hard pronunciation, but having learned French first, it didn't seem like that big of a deal to me. So that's what I'm learning right now and why I chose to learn it. So what's next for me? Well, when I get Norwegian to a point where I feel like I can add another language to the mix, I have a choice to make. I'm either going to go back to Irish, which is where my heart lives, or I will start a new journey in Hungarian, which seems like a really cool language. Thank you so much for watching. As always, please subscribe with the button below and give me a thumbs up if you liked what you saw. And stay tuned for more videos about all things language learning. Ha det!